and welcome to the Coffee Rhetoric podcast. I'm Tiffani, creator and writer of the blog Coffee Rhetoric, and I have several things to unpack in this episode. But before I do, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the recent passing of the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, and to commemorate her life. And just shout out the indelible mark she left not only on the world of music, but on people's lives. And she did this spanning several generations, okay? She was an acclaimed Grammy-winning singer with just this pure, soulful voice that would just give people goosebumps. And she was also an accomplished pianist. And her parents were also accomplished musicians. In most instances, Aretha gave us soundtracks for our lives. She gave us soundtracks for social justice movements. She gave us soundtracks for the ups and downs of our relationships. And she not only trailblazed, but she set the stage for some of your favorite contemporary R&B singers, and she continued to do so up until her death on August 16th of this year. And another thing to note is that Aretha was an incredibly candid woman. She gave us some of the most memorable and wonderfully snarky in the most frank pop cultural moments. She epitomized the concept of fuck you, pay me. Remember that phrase from Goodfellas, fuck you, pay me. Aretha kind of embodied that phrase. She did this to hold people accountable so that they would respect her for her art and for her creative labor. And she wanted people to pay her for what she thought she was worth. And you have to keep in mind that Aretha came up in a time, like she charted her career trajectory in a time when record labels were particularly notorious for taking advantage of Black artists. Aretha wanted her money on the spot before she hit any stage to perform. And we all know how the music industry brass, past and present, how they like to prey on Black artists, particularly Black female singers. They chewed them up. They would take advantage of them. They would con them and their families out of royalties and money, and they would spit them out with nothing to show for their efforts or their talents. And this was particularly common with white-owned record labels. So Aretha was very deliberate in her demand to be paid on the spot. She became famous once again during an era when these white-owned record labels were flagrantly screwing over Black artists like Ray Charles, Chuck Berry, and artists of the like. And a lot of the Black girl groups of yesteryear, they were ripping them off and not paying them royalties, and they were holding the rights to their music hostage. Aretha not only demanded to be paid for her performances, but she wanted it in cold, hard cash. And she wanted them to fork over the money directly to her unless otherwise noted in her contract. And reports say that Aretha, when she would get her money in cold hard cash, she would put the money in her purse and she would give it to her bodyguard, who would stand off off stage where she was performing, kind of guarding her money. And the tax nightmare that this approach probably created notwithstanding, I would say that we can probably all take a lesson from this approach. But we got to make sure you pay your bills and you don't run afoul of the R. I'm sorry, I'm so tongue tied. I am so tongue tied. But you got to make sure you pay your bills and that you don't run afoul of the IRS. And, alter this approach to suit your own needs, especially those of us who work as freelancers and or independent contractors who are creators, whether we're photographers, writers, musicians, artists, or even if we're just like landscapers, whether we have a paper route. No matter what your business is, if you're working for yourself, I think there's a lot to be said for this approach to know what you're worth and to demand your money up front. And once again, making sure not to run afoul of the IRS. All of this is that Aretha was an incredibly complex woman. She is incomparable and she is forever legendary. May she retain her crown. And I just want to personally thank Aretha Franklin for leaving us with such an incredible body of work, with memorable looks, and with all of the chuckle-worthy interviews she did. Most notably, that that Wall Street Journal interview, um, where she talked about beautiful gowns, lovely gowns, beautiful gowns. Okay, so now that that's said and done, let's hit the ground running. And now, since we're on the topic of singers, let's talk a little bit about Amy Winehouse. I finally had a chance to watch the Amy Winehouse documentary, Amy, which is currently streaming on Netflix. Now, I consider myself an Amy Winehouse connoisseur of sorts, and I actually happened upon her music pre-beehive hairdo, pre-severe winged eyeliner, while I was actually shadily downloading music via those MP3 apps. Remember those? This was pre-Spotify, pre-SoundCloud, pre-Tidal, where if you wanted to listen to some music and maybe you were broke and you didn't have the money to buy the full album at the time, you would find right when smartphones were just kind of popping and you had the HTC and the what was that one called? The I can't think of the name right now, but when right before smartphones got really, really intricate, but you were able to download the MP3 apps so that you can download music onto your phone. That is what I did. I would do this in a shady fashion. And I actually was trying to download one song in particular, but I inadvertently ended up downloading Amy's song, You Should Be Stronger Than Me. And I guess you can say the rest is history. Because after I heard that song, I got to Googling and I was like, who is this chick? She didn't look like your standard pop star. She didn't sound like your standard pop star. And I was very intrigued. And that kind of led me to the rest of her music. And it led me to her album, Frank. So that was my introduction to Amy Winehouse. In any event, the documentary includes video footage of Amy's life, her interactions with friends, families, lovers. What an antiquated phrase, lovers. The men she dated. That is so antiquated, lovers. But the men she dated, her relationships with music industry colleagues, and the relationships she cultivated and the friendships she cultivated with people like producer Salaam Remi, Mos Def, Questlove, and just kind of like record A&R types. It's a very sad and depressing and at times infuriating profile of her life. And it charts how she kind of spiraled as she became more visible and famous, and, how she struggled to grapple with fame. and her how she tried to fight her demons, and how she tried to grapple with things like eating disorders, alcoholism, and then later hard drug use. um but also, I will say it's also a celebratory look at her life, in the way music, particularly jazz, influenced Amy's life. Now, her music, you can kind of tell how she was influenced by the black doo-wop girl groups of yesteryear, and how she was influenced by a lot of jazz greats. But one thing I didn't know before watching this documentary, I didn't realize Amy Winehouse was such a huge jazz nerd. And she kind of used her knowledge of jazz to encourage the musicians and the producers she was working with, to encourage them and challenge them to rediscover the genre, and just to kind of rediscover the greats in a newfound appreciation for the genre. Um, the infuriating aspects of the documentary mostly involved her enabling parasitic and largely absent father, Mitch Winehouse, um, which is unfortunate, because it seemed like I think he was a cab driver, and he wasn't really present in Amy's life during her formative years, and it seemed like all she wanted was her father's love and affection and attention. Um, but her father was, as Amy got older and she was right on the cusp of fame, her father, he seemed more concerned with her becoming famous than her tackling and healing from her demons. And he always seemed to try to sabotage or question any suggestion from like concerned friends and record label people that she needed help, whether it was help that would address her eating disorder, whether it was help that would help reel in her alcohol consumption, or later her heavy drug addiction. Mitch Winehouse seemed more interested in riding Amy's coattails and making a name for himself, and he just really did not come off well in this documentary. Another one of Amy's huge enablers was her junkie ex-husband, Blake Fielder Civil, who is just like a dumpster fire, a walking trash heap. Now, he was actually dating another woman when he got with Amy Winehouse, and he was kind of going back and forth between his partner, who I believe he's still currently with, and Amy. And I read somewhere in one of those British kind of tabloids, online publications like the Daily Mail or something to that effect. I remember a few years ago had read an interview with Fielder Civil's girlfriend at the time, how she was talking about how she knew that Blake was seeing Amy, and how she thought Amy was just kind of sad and pathetic and insecure, and how I think she felt like she was doing Amy a favor by letting Blake be with her and sleep with her, when in actuality he was kind of playing them both. But in any event, Blake Fielder Civil was a walking trash heap, and he is who Back to Black is largely about, and he is who admittedly introduced Amy to the harder drugs, and who encouraged her to use heavy drugs, and who encouraged her addiction. So yes, Blake Fielder Civil was Amy's biggest enabler. Amy was incredibly obsessed with Blake, and she wanted his approval, and she wanted his love, and she had a healthy obsession with him, and he took advantage of that. And once, I'll say, he went to prison. Remember when Amy won the Grammy and she said she dedicated to her Blake incarcerated? I don't know if you remember that. Well, Blake incarcerated, once he went to prison, I don't know, Amy seemed to finally be on the road to Again, the documentary is very sad, but it's worth a watch. And if you're a fan of Amy Winehouse's music, or if you followed her career recovery to healing, she spent some time in St. Lucia. She was in a good place. She seemed like she was ready to heal. Notwithstanding the fact that her dad showed up to St. Lucia with a film crew trying to exploit his own daughter. But she was ready to heal. She was ready to start a collaborative music project with like Mos Def and Salam and Questlove. She wanted to kind of start a super group. She was ready to put Back to Black behind her. She didn't want to do any more PR or touring or anything related to Back to Black, because I feel like she felt like the album was very triggering to her, because once again, most of it was about her estranged husband at the time, and it was about her addictions and her dysfunctional relationship with her estranged husband. She was ready to move on, and she didn't want to do any more promotion for the album. She just wanted to get back to her jazz roots and start newer and fresher musical projects. So here's what Salam Remy had to say about Amy in a 2017 interview with DJ Vlad.
When you initially heard Amy Winehouse, like, what did you think?
When I heard her demos, I wasn't sure, because I thought it was kind of maybe in a fake Erykah Badu-ish type vibe. When she sat in the room with me and opened her mouth and played her guitar, I was clear that she had something special, from that moment onward. And then we just started working, and then she inspired me to tap back into an area of jazz that I hadn't really heard since I was a kid, and to play more jazz music, and to really make not what would have been categorized as a neo-soul album, but a very jazz, very hip-hop album. And, Chiba Chiba drums underneath an organ with, a trumpet, kind of staying on both sides of it. So what I thought when I saw her was like, okay, you're 18 now, what are you going to be by the time you're 25? And that was big for me.
At any point in time, give it a watch and kind of formulate your own opinions. Check it out. Now, let's talk about this incident that happened recently this past week at the Orlando International Airport involving this belligerent white doctor named Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, who apparently went there to the Orlando International Airport acting the plumb fool. Okay. Firstly, he showed up at 6 o'clock a.m. to check in for a 6:24 a.m. flight. Now, if you've ever flown anywhere in your life, you would know, and it's always suggested that you show up for your flight at least an hour and a half early. Not even 2 hours, 3 hours, as early as possible. You don't show up 20 minutes prior to check-in. So in any event, that is what this white doctor did. He showed up about 24 minutes late, prior to a takeoff, and airline employees basically told him he was too late to check in. So instead of taking the L and taking accountability for the fact that he did not plan accordingly to catch his flight, and that he was late to check in, Dr. Jeffrey Epstein decided he wanted to get loud and wrong and belligerent. He wanted to argue back and forth with the airline employees. He was threatening them, and he was challenging them to call the police so that he can get arrested. He was insulting them. So when the police finally did turn up to defuse the situation, and to take him down, he kind of continued to act a belligerent ass. Like, he was antagonistic toward the police. And then when they finally did kind of tackle him, he was resisting arrest, and he was kicking the police. He was spitting at the police. He was just on the floor. This man was basically at the airport acting the fucking fool, okay? And so when they took him down, they had to basically pepper spray him to take him down. And so then he quickly went from being the antagonist to being a victim, which is par for the course, if you know what I mean. Par for the course. So, the gag is that when they finally pepper sprayed him in the face and took Dr. Jeffrey Epstein down, he started hooting and hollering, and he yelled that the police were treating him like a quote unquote fucking black person. He said, "You're treating me like a fucking black person." That is what he said. Oh, what clownery. Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, but did you die though? No, you did not. Because I promise you, if Dr. Jeffrey Epstein were actually being treated like a black person, he would have gotten far worse than being yoked up and sprayed in the face with some pepper spray. Far worse. Look at how Alabama police violently took down that young woman, Chiquisia Clemens, at the Waffle House. When all she and her friend freaking wanted was plastic utensils with their meal. And they took her down violently, quite violently. And this is why I don't really see it for white people or any other non-black person who likes to sea lion and gaslight black people who protest or speak out against state violence or who kneel during the national anthem. I don't see it for y'all when you all try to call yourselves trying to challenge us or challenge our positions, because I feel like you know what's what. And you're not simply being ignorant. You know what's what, but you're just trying to kind of like bat our intellect around and play devil's advocate for shits and giggles. And this is why I don't see it for any of you all when you all try to challenge us on things like that. So in any event, the Orlando Police Department's arrest report reportedly said... Okay, this is hilarious. So the Orlando Police Department's arrest report reportedly said that they noticed a white froth around Dr. Jeffrey Epstein's mouth area. And they actually, and if you watch the video of that whole kind of incident and takedown, you'll see him getting angry. But they noticed a white froth kind of around his mouth area, and they asked him if he was having an issue with his mouth area. And so basically this white man was literally frothing at the mouth mad because he couldn't get his way. And then them asking him what was going on with his mouth area set him off even more. Clownery. So once again, any person who undermines a black person's right to exist or who want to act as apologists for those that violate our civil rights or the civil rights of others, yet they understand the documented history of black people's relationship with law enforcement, I just really don't buy that people are just ignorant to that fact. They know, and I feel like they actually relish the privilege they have when they kind of plan to get arrested at rallies or when they argue back and forth with police officers, or when they act shitty in public places like Dr. Jeffrey Epstein did. Almost like they're daring someone to call the police on them. Imagine having that kind of privilege. And because they have that luxury, people like Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, they kind of watch how things unfold between black people and trigger happy police officers. And it's why they've been weaponizing the police and calling 911 in droves over dumb shit on black people in hopes of getting us arrested, almost like they're trying to put us in our place and exert some sort of perceived authority over us. And like Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of people like him, they think police brutality is solely reserved for black people and that we somehow deserve it. Which is why he told the cops they were treating him like a quote unquote fucking black person when they tackled him and sprayed him in the face and took him down. So now, during a report, Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, he admitted to being he's an admitted Trump supporter. He was rude and nasty. He was looking for trouble because he knew he'd come away from the incident unscathed. He knew it. Other than getting sprayed in the face, he knew that his actions, would leave him alive and that he'd come away from it unscathed. White privilege is a hell of a drug. White male hubris is something else, right? So in an interview with the TV station WESH2, this man, Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, had the nerve to say that he basically was acting out on purpose. He was acting an ass on purpose. He was being abusive towards airline employees on purpose and being antagonistic towards police on purpose because he was, quote, trying to make a point. And he was trying to prompt businesses and airlines to treat customers better. That is what he believed he was doing. And this is what he said during an interview with WESH2. And I swear I can't make this BS up. This is what he said out of his own mouth. He said, quote, "I was making a point. If you're going to do this to a white doctor who's 59 years old for doing nothing, then why should black people trust you?" Dr. Jeffrey Epstein also added, "I'm a conservative Republican. I'm a Trump guy. But until the police fix this problem, I don't blame black people for being upset when they get arrested." Unquote. Oh, wow. So this man basically feels like he was acting an entitled ass in the name of social justice, when we all know that is a lie. So in any event, this obnoxious, frothy-mouthed white man has been charged with battery on a law enforcement officer, and he was charged with resisting an officer with violence, and he was also charged, those two charges are felonies. He was also charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. So, to quote Monique from that one episode of VH1's Charm School, "See, when you do clownery, the clown comes back to bite." On that note, let's take a moment to shake our heads at white male hubris.
Women in particular, by the way, I want you to get more involved because men have been getting on my nerves lately. I mean, I just every day I read the newspaper and I just think, like, brothers, what's wrong with you guys? I mean, what's wrong with us? All right, I mean, we're violent, we're bullying, just not handling our business. So I think empowering more women on the continent, that ought to right away is going to, I think, lead to some better policies.
Welcome back to the Coffee Rhetoric podcast. And honey, now for the piece de resistance of stunts and shows. Let's talk about Omarosa's revenge. I don't even know where to start with this. Let's dive right into it. Let's hit the ground running. So, in a bold move straight out of Cersei Lannister's playbook, and if you watch Game of Thrones, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Omarosa Manigault Newman, who was, as we all know, was fired from her position at the White House, has been clapping back at those people in the most public way. And she has Trump and her cronies shook. Okay? So before I dive in, let me start by saying, before Omarosa joined the crazy train and decided to align herself with the current group of grifters squatting in the White House, she actually used to be one of my problematic faves. After her initial and then subsequent later appearances on The Apprentice, I really sort of dug Omarosa. I dug that she was and is a black woman who had no qualms about being the way she is. She didn't feel beholden to a lot of the restrictive ways society, including other black people, but she didn't feel beholden to the demands that are put on black women and that we're expected to adhere to, such as don't be opinionated, be a lady, be demure, don't be ratchet, talk this way, dress that way, don't think that way, don't be angry, don't be this, don't be that. Omarosa didn't really feel beholden to a lot of those restrictions. She was and she still, I was and I still am kind of intrigued at the way Omarosa makes her way throughout the world, makes her way in the world in her quest for clout, power, and respect. Money, power, respect. Remember the song with Lil Kim and all of them? I'm intrigued by the way Omarosa makes her way in the world in her quest for money, power, respect, and clout, which you need in life. In that she's not afraid to be a villain. She's not afraid to be a villain. Now, and this is some kind of, and Omarosa is on some Game of Thrones scandal stuff, right? So she's not afraid to be a villain. And she's not afraid to be disliked. And writer and feminist Chimamanda Adichie Adoche. I'm sorry, I'm probably just jacking up her name, and I feel embarrassed by it. But you know who I'm talking about. But Chimamanda Adichie, and I'm probably leaving out some other aspects of her name. And please don't come for me. But you know who I'm talking about. But Chimamanda, she talks about women working hard to be liked instead of being themselves. So Omarosa, she wasn't afraid of being disliked. She's not afraid of being the villain. Which is uncommon for a lot of kind of notable black women, because so often we're always like our behaviors are policed. We're always expected to be nice, to be demure, and again, to be a lady, so that we don't come across as quote unquote angry black women or whatever other stereotypes people like to project onto us. So that's why I've always been intrigued by Omarosa. Now, don't get me wrong, she's still canceled for her complicity in the Trump fuck shit and for saying people would have to bow down to him after he stole the election. But love Omarosa or loathe her, and we mostly like to loathe her. People have to admit that she's a shrewd woman, and that her career trajectory in this current administration, notwithstanding, that her political career trajectory, despite her blind loyalty and her admitted complicity with all the Trump stuff, that she's not a stupid woman, and she's not someone that will take a slight lying down, or that will easily go into that good night. Now, if you recall, she slowly started dropping gems here and there during her stint on Celebrity Big Brother. If you remember she went on Celebrity Big Brother, and she started kind of dropping little jabs and tea on her time in the White House, and she started talking about the people like Mike Pence and how the country was in trouble and how Trump was a racist. She started dropping gems on Celebrity Big Brother. And I think the mistake John Kelly and crew made was underestimating Omarosa and writing her off as just some useless black woman whose presence got under their skin and who they felt had no place at the table at that political level amongst a group of wealthy white men. They didn't want her there, I think. Not I think, I know. They did not want her there. They didn't feel like she had a place at the table at that political level. And also remember that after Omarosa's departure, news reports leaked that she left in an uproar and that she was trying to fight folks and she tried to interrupt a Christmas party and that she tried to enter the presidential residence after she got fired. Remember, and all of that other nonsense, and that she had to be physically removed from the premises by the Secret Service, who later tweeted that they did no such thing, that it didn't happen, that they did not have to physically remove Omarosa from the premises after she was fired. Well, honey, while making the rounds to promote her book, Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House, Omarosa has been dropping receipts left and right in the form of recorded conversations she got while she was working in the White House. And she got this footage in what's supposed to be some of the most elusive and high security areas in the White House. And she also apparently has video footage. She said she has at least 200 recordings, and she's got some video footage to corroborate her claims in her book. So in that reports that she left her job in a frenzy turned out to be false and were undoubtedly planted from the inside. Someone from the inside planted those stories about her leaving in such a kind of frenzy were planted from the inside. So but according to the recording of her being fired by John Kelly, who again seemed to really just kind of hate her guts and loathe her, John Kelly actually appeared to be the one who was agitated, and he was making ominous threats in the recording. And he wasn't letting Omarosa speak or ask any questions. And he left her locked in the room with what I believe were 2 White House attorneys, while her husband was forced to wait outside the door. She said they locked her inside the room. So Omarosa later released a recording of Donald Trump calling her the day after she was fired, and he claimed he didn't know what was going on because the inner workings of the White House was a large operation that he's too freaking stupid to truly grasp. And you got to shake your head at Aunt Lydia. I'm sorry, not Aunt Lydia. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who, let's be real, she looks like a melting Picasso painting, all fragmented in the face and shit, but I digress. Sarah Huckabee Sanders had the nerve to talk about Omarosa's lack of integrity when everybody in that administration, including Huckabee Sanders, lack integrity. They lack integrity and a moral compass, and they've somehow, in some way, shape, or form, violated White House protocol or security measures. But anyway, let me go ahead on and roll that beautiful bean footage.
In the issue that you may or may not have a full appreciation for, but I think you do, this would be a pretty high level of accountability, meaning a court-martial. We're not suggesting any legal action here. Just stay with me. Just stay with me. Yeah. That it would be a pretty serious offense So with that, I'm just going to ask you, these gentlemen will explain it, and we'll bring a personnel person in after they talk to you. But just to understand that, I'd like to see this be a friendly departure. There are pretty significant legal issues that we hope don't develop into something that will make it ugly for you. But I think it's important to understand that if we make this a friendly departure, we can all be, you can look at your time here in the White House as a year of service to the nation, and then you can go on without any type of difficulty in the future relative to your reputation.
Okay, so before I continue, now that I'm in my right frame of mind, let me go ahead on and acknowledge that earlier I referenced Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I couldn't quite get her name right in my mind because I wasn't in my right frame of mind. But Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I just wanted to get that right before anybody comes for me. And I'm a huge fan of hers, but I just couldn't. Her name wasn't coming to me at that point in time. Not because I don't know it or that I can't pronounce it. It just wasn't coming to me. I had a brain fart. But in any event, let's get back on topic. After Omarosa started dropping her recordings and trying to earn her cookout invitational back from the Committee of Black People, and when she started publicly denouncing her former dark overlord Trump, Cthulhu. I'm so silly, man. So, Trump, after she started publicly denouncing him, Cthulhu, he went on this unhinged, rage-filled Twitter rant lashing out at Omarosa. Because, he's the only one allowed to stab former cronies in the back. So, he claims that no one in the White House liked Omarosa. Now, mind you, he said he didn't know what was going on because it was a large operation and he's a dummy and he didn't know what was what. But then after Omarosa publicly denounced him, he went on this unhinged, rage-filled Twitter rant lashing out at Omarosa saying, well, nobody liked her and blah, 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 and she wasn't liked and she wasn't doing her job. So, Trump, what is the truth? Do you know what's going on? Or do you sit up in your room just tweeting nonstop bullshit on Twitter? But anyway, he claims no one in the White House liked Omarosa, even though he called her the day after she was fired, pretending to be upset about it. Check this clip out.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody.
Wow.
They run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
God damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
So Trump went way out of pocket. He said all that, but then went way out of pocket and said that he was glad that John Kelly fired that quote-unquote dog. Girl, I never. He called a black woman a dog. A sitting president of the United States called a black woman a dog. Listen, I have never in my lifetime, even with the most repugnant Republican in office, seen a sitting president act out in this manner, the way that Donald Trump does, without some type of repercussion. Okay? Calling a black woman a dog is unacceptable. It's inexcusable and it's unprofessional. But keep in mind, Trump uses a lot of racist coded language when he refers to people of color and black people. So him calling Omarosa that dog is right on trend for him. Omarosa's black women are dogs, Hispanics are bad hombres and racists, black immigrants are from shithole countries, and Muslims are quote-unquote animals, so forth and so on. But according to Donald Trump, violent white supremacists are some very fine people. And he likes to regurgitate shit from Fox News and white supremacist talking points to the letter. He repeats those points. So while it was absolutely appalling that a sitting president called a black woman a dog, considering the source, Donald Trump, it's not unsurprising. And the fact that Omarosa may have been trying to actually unearth an alleged tape of Trump flat out using the racial epithets, that may have been one of the primary reasons why John Kelly wanted her, why John Kelly and crew wanted her out of the White House, because she also released another recording of her and some White House aides talking about said tape, and that she had some kind of source that had access to the tape. Some of the claims Omarosa makes in her book are some of the claims are that Trump is mentally unraveling, that the White House administration that she willingly signed on to work with and for is a racist cesspool, that Mike Pence is a homophobic weirdo. Also, and also Mike Pence kind of strikes me as the type of person that would probably cut a hole in a sheet to do sex with his wife. He just gives me that kind of weird vibe. He's a weirdo. Like, he would cut a hole in a sheet to do sex with his wife that way. I mean, he calls her mother, so why not? But yeah, she said Mike Pence is a homophobic weirdo, that Kellyanne Conway is useless, super and that John Kelly is a mean racist, okay, and that Betsy DeVos is a dummy, and that Trump didn't allocate any funds for African American outreach, so forth and so on. Okay, so none of this stuff is surprising to me. None of the accusations she makes in her book are surprising to me. In any event, despite Trump's best efforts to silence Omarosa, Unhinged has actually topped the New York Times bestseller list, and it's actually gotten good reviews on Amazon, even from self-described Trump supporters. It's gotten good reviews on there. And you know what? I went ahead and, call me a hypocrite, but I've gone ahead and added it to my cart to purchase because I'm curious. Hell hath no fury like Omarosa scorned. And on that note, before I sign off, I kind of wanted to briefly touch on an issue, a local issue in my town. I won't mention any names or name the establishment, but recently a black person with a seemingly healthy local following recently relayed an incident that happened at said local establishment, a place that I actually enjoy frequenting. He said that a white male bartender tried to police the conversation that he and a friend were having while they were at the bar, about racial issues, and that they were actually, according to him, it was a relatively benign conversation about racial issues and about something he had actually written. So to make a long story short, I'm assuming the bartender overheard their conversation and he told them they needed to stop talking about the said issues or leave. They paid their tab and they very promptly left. So in any event, his post started to gain traction, and I saw across Facebook, and I saw various threads unfolding on Facebook about the incident, including on the establishment's page. Now, there were a lot of white people sea-lining and tone checking and gaslighting and actualing the situation. Some wanted to play devil's advocate. And see, this is what bothers me about so-called progressive liberal white people. Not just right-wing conservative white people, but also progressive liberal white people. Though you may have the privilege of thinking you can, you don't get to, well, actually, and play devil's advocate about black people's lived experiences or people of color's lived experiences, especially in these sorts of situations, just because you happen to like the person or place that caused the harm. It's intellectually dishonest for you to do that. It's epistemic violence. No one is entitled to prove their personhood or agency to you. This is why black people opt out of conversations about racial matters with white people, because of the constant sea lining and the gaslighting. Now, I don't know how this situation will essentially end, or if said establishment will address the situation or apologize, or address the situation with their bartender, white-splaining and policing black people's conversations at the bar. But I personally don't know how I feel about continuing to support an establishment that tells black people that they can tells black people what they can or can't talk about with their friends while drinking at the bar. Because I know I have had some very amazing and off the hook, benign, but some very amazing and off the hook conversations while out drinking with my friends about racial issues, about gender issues, just situations that should probably get us on the Joy Ann Reid show or something. Just really great, very smart and intellectually stimulating conversations that aren't harming anybody with any sense anyway. So I don't know how I would feel about sitting at the bar having these conversations while out with my friends and having some white bartender tell me, you can't talk about that in here or you're going to have to leave. And I don't know how I feel about that. And I don't know how I feel about lending that establishment my patronage and my support anymore. Particularly if that conversation isn't harming or cursing anybody. Listen, y'all can go ahead and play devil's advocate with your mama. Stop gaslighting black people whenever we open up and share stories about incidents like this, okay? Do us and yourselves a favor and stop doing that. So on that note, thank you for listening to the Coffee Rhetoric podcast. If you like what you've heard and you want to know more about me or read some of my work, remember to visit www.coffeerhetoric.com. If you'd like to support the Coffee Rhetoric blog and or podcast, please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/Coffee Rhetoric, where I upload the podcast a few days prior to publicly posting it when I'm on deadline, where I upload vlogs that aren't public, and where my most popular but archived blog posts go. I'll also shout you out on forthcoming podcasts for being a patron. You can now access Coffee Rhetoric podcast on Anchor, on SoundCloud, on Spotify, on Stitcher, on iTunes, on Google Podcasts, on Radio Public, and on Breaker. So be sure to share this episode. Tell a friend, tell a frenemy, tell your trash ass ex so he can stop playing on your phone. Tell your lovers, tell your family members, minus the toxic ones, because remember, y'all are not speaking. Until next time, thank you for listening.